The morning mist hung low over Fort Braxton as Staff Sergeant Maya Chin stepped off the transport bus, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The silence that greeted her arrival spoke volumes. 43 male recruits had been training here for 6 weeks already, their brotherhood forged in sweat and shared suffering. Now she was here to disrupt their carefully crafted ecosystem, whether they wanted her or not. Master Sergeant Diego Torres emerged from the training facility like a storm cloud given human form. His barrel chest strained against his perfectly pressed uniform, every ribbon and badge positioned with military precision. At 42, Torres had spent 2 decades molding young men into warriors. He had never trained a woman, and his weathered face made it clear he had no intention of starting now. Before you hear how this story unfolds, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Comment below and let me know what state or country you are tuning in from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world, and your location might just tie into the themes of breaking barriers that you will see in this story. Torres circled Maya like a predator sizing up prey. She stood at attention, her 5'6" frame dwarfed by the towering drill sergeant, but her posture remained rigid and unwavering. Her black hair was pulled back in regulation style, revealing a face that had seen more than most 26-year-olds should ever witness. A small scar traced along her left temple, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. The other recruits had gathered at the windows of the barracks, their faces pressed against the glass like children at a zoo. Maya could feel their stares burning into her back, their whispered conversations carrying on the morning breeze. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the complete absence of any welcoming gesture, any acknowledgement that she belonged here. Torres finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. You think you can hang with my boys, Chun? You think because some desk jockey in Washington decided to play social experiment that you belong in my training program? Let me tell you something right now. I have been turning boys into men for 20 years, and I do not plan to lower my standards for anyone. Maya remained silent, her eyes fixed on a point beyond Torres' shoulder. She had learned long ago that responding to such provocations only made things worse. Better to let them underestimate her. Let them believe she was just another diversity quota filling a checkbox somewhere in the Pentagon. Recruit Jackson Hayes, a massive farm boy from Nebraska, whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Great, now we have to babysit a girl. There goes our shot at Honor Squad. The snickers that followed his comment rippled through the formation like wildfire. Torres did nothing to stop the commentary. In fact, his slight smile suggested he approved of the sentiment. He assigned Maya to the furthest bunk from the others, in a corner of the barracks that reeked of mildew and neglect. Her gear locker was smaller than regulation, clearly a storage closet that had been hastily converted. When she opened it, mouse droppings scattered across the floor. The training schedule was brutal by design. 6 a.m. reveille, followed by obstacle courses that pushed human endurance to its limits. Maya kept pace with every exercise, completed every challenge, but her accomplishments seemed to disappear into a void. When she finished the rope climb in record time, Torres claimed his stopwatch had malfunctioned. When she scored perfect marks on the written examinations, he accused her of cheating and demanded she retake them under supervision. 3 weeks into her integration, Torres announced the trust drill. This exercise was sacred ground in military training, designed to forge unbreakable bonds between soldiers who would depend on each other in combat. Recruits were paired randomly, forced to rely completely on their partner for survival during simulated combat scenarios. The announcement sent a chill through Maya that had nothing to do with the October morning air. She had seen trust drills before, knew how they could be manipulated by instructors with personal agendas. The randomness of partner selection was never truly random when drill sergeants wanted to prove a point. What Maya did not know was that every interaction, every slight, every moment of her systematic isolation had been observed and documented. High above the training grounds, in the administrative building that overlooked the entire facility, someone had been watching. Someone with stars on their collar and decades of experience recognizing institutional prejudice when they saw it. The trust drill was scheduled for the following Monday. As Maya lay in her narrow bunk that night, listening to the recruits around her plan their weekend leave, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The silence that surrounded her felt heavier than her gear, more oppressive than the humid Georgia air. She had no idea that her real test was about to begin, or that the eyes watching her every move belonged to someone with the power to change everything. The trust drill would reveal more than just the character of the recruits participating. It would expose the rotten foundation of prejudice that Torres had built his entire career upon. Monday morning arrived gray and threatening, storm clouds gathering on the horizon like an omen of what was to come. Monday morning arrived with the promise of pain. The trust drill exercise field stretched before the recruits like a battlefield designed by sadists, complete with obstacle walls, rope bridges, and simulated combat zones that would test every bond between partners. Maya stood in formation as Torres paced before them, his combat boots leaving deep impressions in the muddy ground. The rules were simple and terrifying. Each recruit would be paired with a partner who would literally hold their life in their hands. Blindfolded climbs over 30-foot walls, rope bridge crossings where one wrong move meant a 20-foot fall, and live fire exercises where partners had to trust each other completely to survive. Torres held a clipboard with partner assignments, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. When he called out Maya's name, paired with recruit Kyle Morrison, the snickers began immediately. Morrison was Torres's golden boy, a former college wrestler with arms like tree trunks and an ego to match his impressive physique. He stood 6'4" and outweighed Maya by 100 pounds. More importantly, he worshipped Torres like a father figure and shared his views about women in combat roles. What none of them knew was that every word being spoken was being recorded. High above the training field, in the third-floor office of the administrative building, someone sat behind tinted windows with binoculars, a notepad, and recording equipment that would capture every moment of what was about to unfold. The observer had been documenting the systematic harassment for weeks, building a case that would eventually destroy careers. The first exercise paired Maya and Morrison on the rope bridge. 30 feet above ground, the bridge swayed with every step as Maya moved across first, trusting Morrison to secure the safety lines. What Torres had whispered to Morrison during equipment check went unheard by everyone except the observer with the directional microphone. Let her fall. Make it look natural. Morrison began loosening the safety rope as Maya reached the center of the bridge. The line went slack just as she transferred her full weight to it, sending her plummeting toward the ground. Only her combat reflexes saved her life as she grabbed desperately for the bridge supports, her fingers finding purchase on the rough rope just inches from a fall that would have shattered bones. Torres blew his whistle and stormed onto the field, screaming at Maya for failing to trust her partner. She pulled herself back onto the bridge, her palms bleeding from rope burns, her breathing ragged from adrenaline and terror. Morrison shrugged and claimed equipment failure, his face a mask of false concern that fooled no one except those who wanted to be fooled. The observer above made detailed notes about the deliberately loosened safety line, the whispered instructions from Torres, and Morrison's practiced look of innocence. Every detail was being recorded for future reference, every moment of systematic abuse documented with the precision of a criminal investigation. The second exercise involved blind navigation through an obstacle course while partners provided verbal guidance. Maya was blindfolded and handed off to Morrison, who immediately began leading her directly into obstacles. She stumbled over barriers that should have been easy to avoid, crashed into walls that appeared out of nowhere, and fell into mud pits that her partner somehow failed to warn her about. When she removed the blindfold, her uniform was soaked with filthy water and torn in 3 places. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead where Morrison had guided her straight into a low-hanging branch. The other recruits laughed openly now, emboldened by Torres's obvious approval of her systematic humiliation. Torres called for a water break and gathered the other recruits around him like disciples receiving wisdom. Maya sat alone on a fallen log, using her undershirt to clean the blood from her face. She could hear their whispered conversations, their jokes about how she did not belong here, their bets about how long before she quit and went home. What they could not hear was the soft click of a telephoto lens capturing every moment of her isolation, every bruise and cut that painted the picture of institutional hazing. The observer above had seen enough military training to know the difference between challenging exercises and deliberate abuse. This crossed every line that existed. The final exercise of the day was live fire simulation, where partners had to navigate a course while paintball rounds flew overhead. Morrison would cover Maya's advance while she moved between positions. Then she would cover his movement in return. Trust was not just important here. It was the difference between success and injury. Torres handed Morrison a weapon loaded with paintballs that had been frozen overnight, turning non-lethal training rounds into instruments capable of causing serious damage. When Maya began her movement across the open ground, Morrison opened fire directly at her instead of providing covering fire over the enemy positions. The frozen paintballs struck her back and shoulders with devastating force, each impact feeling like a sledgehammer blow. She stumbled and fell behind inadequate cover as Morrison continued his assault, painting her as an enemy target instead of protecting her as a partner. The pain was excruciating, but worse was the realization that her own partner was trying to hurt her. Torres blew his whistle and declared the exercise complete, claiming Maya had failed to trust her partner and expose herself to enemy fire. She lay curled behind her cover, her back a canvas of welts and bruises that would take weeks to heal. Morrison reloaded his weapon and walked away without offering assistance, his job completed to Torres's obvious satisfaction. As the sun set over Fort Braxton, Maya limped back to the barracks alone. Her uniform was destroyed, her body was battered, and her spirit was hanging by the thinnest of threads. She believed she had no allies, no witnesses to the systematic abuse, no hope that justice would ever find this place. What she did not know was that every moment of her suffering had been witnessed, recorded, and documented by someone with the power to destroy the careers of everyone involved. The observer above had seen enough to know that this was not training, it was torture designed to break her will and force her to quit. The trust drill had revealed exactly what it was designed to expose, but not in the way Torres had intended. It had shown who could be trusted and who was capable of deliberate cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming, the case was airtight, and justice was already in motion. Maya fell asleep that night believing she was alone in her fight. She had no idea that her most powerful ally was about to reveal themselves, and that the hell she had endured was about to become the foundation for the complete destruction of everything Torres had built his career upon. Commander Patricia Reeves set down her binoculars and rubbed her tired eyes as the sun disappeared behind the Georgia pines. For 3 weeks, she had maintained her vigil from the third-floor office, documenting every moment of systematic abuse with the methodical precision that had earned her 2 stars and a reputation for absolute integrity. What she had witnessed during the trust drill exercise was beyond institutional hazing. It was criminal assault disguised as military training. Reeves stood 60 years old with silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that had seen combat in 4 different theaters of operation. She commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation, leading by example rather than fear. Her presence at Fort Braxton was no accident. She had come here specifically to observe the integration program. But what she had discovered was far worse than anyone had imagined. The manila folders spread across her desk told a story of institutional corruption that reached back months before Maya's arrival. Reeves had been building this case systematically, gathering evidence that would stand up in any military court. Photographs taken with telephoto lenses showed every bruise, every moment of isolation, every exercise designed to humiliate rather than train. Video recordings captured Torres's whispered instructions to Morrison. Audio files preserved every slur and insult directed at Maya when they thought no one was listening. But Maya Chin was not just another recruit struggling through integration. Reeves opened the classified personnel file that revealed the truth Torres had never bothered to investigate. Staff Sergeant Maya Chin, holder of 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and the Congressional Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism during the Battle of Kandahar Province. She had saved 14 soldiers during a 12-hour siege, carrying wounded men to safety while enemy fire turned the air around her into a death trap. The irony was breathtaking and infuriating. Torres had been systematically abusing one of the most decorated soldiers in the modern military, a woman whose courage under fire had already been tested in ways he could never comprehend. Reeves had watched this war hero endure treatment that would have broken lesser soldiers, maintaining her military bearing even as she was tortured by the very institution she had bled to defend. Reeves reviewed the footage from the trust drill one more time, her anger building with each replay. Morrison's deliberate sabotage of the safety equipment was attempted murder, pure and simple. Torres's instructions to target Maya during the live fire exercise constituted assault with a deadly weapon. The systematic nature of the abuse, the careful planning, the obvious enjoyment taken in her suffering, it all painted a picture of men who had lost sight of everything the military was supposed to represent. The phone call to Washington had been brief and decisive. Reeves had enough evidence to destroy careers and send people to prison. Her superiors gave her full authority to proceed with immediate action. The integration program was under the direct oversight of the Pentagon, which meant Torres had unknowingly been conducting his campaign of abuse under the nose of the highest levels of military command. Reeves had originally planned to observe for the full 8-week training cycle before taking action, but the events of the trust drill changed everything. Watching Maya nearly die from a 30-foot fall had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She would no longer be a passive observer documenting abuse. She was now an active participant in delivering justice. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Time-stamped photographs showed Morrison loosening the safety rope while Torres provided distraction. Audio recordings captured the whispered instructions to make Maya's fall look accidental. Video footage revealed the frozen paintballs being distributed to Morrison's weapon while standard rounds went to other recruits. Medical documentation would show bruising patterns consistent with assault rather than training injuries. Maya's personnel file revealed not just her combat decorations, but also her academic achievements. Master's degree in military science, expert marksmanship ratings that exceeded most special forces operators, and psychological evaluation scores that marked her as ideal leadership material. Torres had been systematically destroying someone whose qualifications far exceeded his own, whose actual combat experience made his peacetime training look like playground games. Reeves made her decision as she watched Maya limp alone across the parade ground toward the barracks. Torres would be summoned for a private meeting first thing tomorrow morning. She would give him every opportunity to incriminate himself further, to reveal the full extent of his prejudice and corruption. Military justice demanded thorough documentation, and Reeves intended to build a case so airtight that Torres would spend the rest of his life wondering how he had been so catastrophically stupid. The meeting request would be phrased as a routine administrative discussion about integration program metrics. Torres would arrive confident and arrogant, expecting praise for his handling of a difficult situation. Instead, he would find himself face-to-face with a 2-star general who had been documenting his every crime for weeks. Reeves locked the evidence files in her personal safe and prepared to leave the office. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of the end for Torres and everyone who had participated in his systematic campaign of abuse. Maya Chun deserved justice, and more importantly, she deserved to know that her service and sacrifice had been witnessed by someone with the power to make things right. As Reeves walked to her staff car, she could see lights burning in the barracks where Maya was probably treating her wounds in solitude, believing she had no allies in this fight. By tomorrow evening, Maya would discover that the most powerful ally she could have asked for had been watching over her from the very beginning. The trust drill had revealed everything Torres intended to hide, but it had also revealed the true character of everyone involved. Justice was coming to Fort Braxton, and it would be swift, thorough, and absolutely devastating to everyone who had betrayed their oath to protect and defend. Torres walked into the administrative building Tuesday morning with the swagger of a man who believed himself untouchable. The meeting request had come from someone identifying herself as Patricia Reeves from Pentagon Personnel Review, which Torres assumed meant another desk jockey wanting to discuss integration metrics. He had dealt with plenty of Washington bureaucrats over the years, and they all spoke the same language of political correctness and unrealistic expectations. The office he entered was spartanly furnished but impeccably organized. Behind the desk sat a woman in her early 60s wearing the kind of crisp uniform that spoke of attention to detail. Torres noticed she was attractive for her age, though her silver hair and serious expression suggested She took herself far too seriously. He settled into the chair across from her desk without being invited, spreading his legs wide in a display of casual dominance. Reeves studied Torres carefully as he made himself comfortable. She had activated the digital recording system before his arrival, ensuring every word would be preserved for the court-martial proceedings. The man before her was exactly what she had expected based on weeks of observation. Arrogant, entitled, and completely convinced of his own righteousness. "Thank you for coming, Master Sergeant Torres. I wanted to discuss your assessment of the integration program and specifically your evaluation of Staff Sergeant Chen. I understand there have been some challenges with her performance during training exercises." Torres leaned back in his chair and shook his head with the confidence of someone delivering obvious truth. "Ma'am, I have been training soldiers for 20 years, and I can tell you without hesitation that Chen does not belong here. She lacks the physical strength, mental toughness, and intestinal fortitude required for this program. Yesterday's trust drill proved what I have been saying from day one." Reeves made careful notes as Torres spoke, her expression remaining neutral. "Could you elaborate on the specific deficiencies you observed during the trust drill exercise?" The question opened floodgates that Torres was eager to rush through. "She failed every single evolution, ma'am. Could not complete the rope bridge crossing without falling. Got lost during the navigation exercise despite clear verbal guidance from her partner. Completely froze up during the live fire simulation and exposed herself to enemy fire through poor positioning and panic responses." Torres was warming to his subject now, his voice gaining enthusiasm as he detailed Maya's supposed failures. He had no idea he was confessing to criminal assault while being recorded by a 2-star general. Reeves let him talk, occasionally asking follow-up questions that encouraged him to provide even more incriminating details. "In your professional opinion, what caused these failures? Was it inadequate preparation, or something more fundamental?" Torres laughed, a sound devoid of humor or respect. "Ma'am, with all due respect, women simply do not have what it takes for combat roles. They lack upper body strength, they panic under pressure, and they expect special treatment when things get difficult. Chen is a perfect example of why integration is doomed to fail. She would get good soldiers killed in a real combat situation." The recording device captured every word of Torres's bigoted assessment, his complete dismissal of Maya's capabilities based solely on her gender. Reeves continued taking notes, building a comprehensive record of institutional prejudice that would destroy his career. "You mentioned that her partner during the trust drill was Recruit Morrison. How did he perform in providing support and guidance during the exercises?" Torres's face lit up with pride as he discussed his favorite student. "Morrison is exactly what we want in a soldier. Strong, dependable, follows orders without question. He did everything possible to help Chen succeed, but you cannot overcome fundamental limitations through good coaching. Morrison will make an excellent infantry soldier when he completes this program." Reeves set down her pen and looked directly at Torres for the first time during the conversation. Her voice remained calm and professional, but something in her tone should have warned him that dangerous ground lay ahead. "Master Sergeant Torres, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded for official purposes, and I want to ensure you understand the gravity of what you are telling me." Torres shrugged, completely unconcerned by the recording revelation. "Ma'am, I stand by every word I have said. My assessment is based on 20 years of experience and direct observation of Chen's performance. I have documented every failure, and I am prepared to defend my evaluation before any review board." The moment had arrived for Reeves to begin revealing the true nature of this meeting. She opened the folder on her desk and withdrew Torres's personnel file, placing it where he could see his own photograph staring back at him. "Master Sergeant Torres, before we continue, I should properly introduce myself. I am Major General Patricia Reeves, Deputy Commander of Personnel Integration for the Department of Defense." The color drained from Torres's face as the significance of Reeves's rank sank in. A 2-star general had been conducting this interview, not some Pentagon functionary. His casual disrespect, his sprawling posture, his dismissive attitude toward integration policy, all of it had been displayed before one of the most senior officers in the military. "General, I had no idea. Nobody informed me of your rank or position. If I had known, I would never have." Reeves raised her hand to stop his stammering. You would never have told the truth about your systematic campaign to destroy Staff Sergeant Chen. You would never have admitted to sabotaging training exercises. You would never have revealed the depth of your prejudice against female soldiers. Torres tried to stand, but Reeves gestured for him to remain seated. The meeting was far from over, and his education in the reality of his situation had only just begun. She opened another folder and began laying out photographs, each one showing a different moment of Maya's systematic abuse. Master Sergeant Torres, for the past 3 weeks, I have been documenting every aspect of Staff Sergeant Chen's treatment during this integration program. What you call training, I call criminal assault. The emergency formation was called at 0800 hours sharp. Every recruit and training officer summoned to the main parade ground with no explanation beyond immediate compliance required. Maya stood in the back row of the formation, her body still aching from the previous day's trust drill, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Torres stood at attention beside his fellow instructors, his face pale and drawn after spending the night contemplating the magnitude of his career-ending mistakes. Major General Patricia Reeves emerged from the administrative building in full dress uniform, her ribbons and decorations catching the morning sunlight like armor forged from decades of distinguished service. The sight of a 2-star general at Fort Braxton sent whispers through the formation, but the absolute silence that followed her appearance spoke to the gravity of whatever announcement was coming. Reeves positioned herself at the center of the formation and surveyed the assembled personnel with the commanding presence that had made her one of the most respected officers in the modern military. Her voice carried across the parade ground with crystal clarity, each word measured and deliberate. I am Major General Patricia Reeves, and I have spent the past 3 weeks conducting an investigation into the conduct of training personnel during the female integration program. What I have discovered represents a systematic violation of military law, basic human decency, and everything our armed forces are sworn to uphold. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Even the Georgia wind seemed to hold its breath as Reeves opened the folder containing evidence that would destroy careers and shatter the carefully constructed mythology of institutional integrity that Torres had built his reputation upon. Master Sergeant Diego Torres stepped forward. Torres moved like a man walking to his execution, his confident swagger replaced by the mechanical movements of someone whose world was collapsing around him. He positioned himself directly in front of Reeves, his eyes fixed on the ground rather than meeting her penetrating gaze. You are hereby charged with systematic harassment, criminal assault, and conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer. The charges stem from your deliberate campaign to abuse, humiliate, and potentially injure Staff Sergeant Maya Chen through the manipulation of training exercises designed to cause physical and psychological harm. Gasps rippled through the formation as recruits processed the word assault. Maya felt her knees weaken as she realized someone had been watching, documenting, building a case for justice she never believed would come. Morrison stood 3 positions to her left, his face white with terror as he understood the implications of Torres's charges. Reeves continued her methodical destruction of everything Torres represented. During the trust drill exercise conducted yesterday, you instructed recruit Morrison to deliberately sabotage safety equipment, causing Staff Sergeant Chen to fall approximately 28 feet. Only her exceptional reflexes prevented serious injury or death from your attempted murder disguised as training. The word murder hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating every assumption the recruits had made about their beloved drill sergeant. Torres remained motionless, knowing that any attempt to defend himself would only make his situation worse. Morrison began shaking visibly, understanding that his role in the conspiracy was about to be exposed to everyone who had watched him assault Maya with frozen paintballs. Recruit Kyle Morrison, Recruit Jackson Hayes, and Recruit Timothy Walsh stepped forward and joined Master Sergeant Torres. The 3 recruits moved like condemned men, their faces reflecting the dawning realization that their participation in systematic abuse had been observed and documented by the highest levels of military authority. The other recruits stared at their former squad mates with mixture of shock and disgust, understanding for the first time that they had been witnessing crimes rather than training. Reeves opened her folder and began displaying enlarged photographs that captured every moment of Maya's systematic torture. The images showed Morrison loosening safety ropes, Hayes providing verbal misdirection during navigation exercises, and Walsh distributing frozen paintballs while Torres provided cover. Each photograph was time-stamped and annotated with precise details that painted an undeniable picture of coordinated assault. These photographs represent only a fraction of the evidence collected during my investigation. We also have audio recordings of conspiracy discussions, video footage of deliberate equipment sabotage, and medical documentation of injuries consistent with assault rather than training accidents. Maya stood transfixed as her suffering was validated before the entire unit. The isolation she had felt, the certainty that she was alone in her fight, all of it had been an illusion. Someone with real power had been watching, caring, building a case for the justice she thought would never come. Reeves turned her attention to Maya, her expression softening for the first time during the formation. "Staff Sergeant Chun, please step forward and join me at the center of the formation." Maya moved on unsteady legs, still processing the reality that she was about to be vindicated before everyone who had participated in or witnessed her systematic abuse. She positioned herself beside Reeves, her military bearing intact despite the emotional tsunami washing over her. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to properly introduce Staff Sergeant Maya Chun, recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor for Extraordinary Heroism during the Battle of Kandahar Province. Holder of 3 Bronze Stars for valor in combat operations, 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received while defending her fellow soldiers under enemy fire." The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Recruits who had mocked her physical capabilities learned they had been abusing someone whose courage under fire had already been tested in ways they could never imagine. Training officers who had dismissed her competence discovered they had been systematically torturing one of the most decorated soldiers in modern military history. During a 12-hour siege in Afghanistan, Staff Sergeant Chun carried 14 wounded soldiers to safety through enemy fire that killed 2 other rescuers. She continued fighting despite shrapnel wounds to her left leg and a concussion from mortar fire. The citation for her Medal of Honor specifically notes her refusal to seek medical attention until every wounded soldier had been evacuated. Torres stood motionless as the full magnitude of his stupidity became clear. He had spent 3 weeks systematically abusing a war hero whose actual combat experience made his peacetime training look like childhood games. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that he could barely process the reality of his situation. Reeves continued her systematic destruction of everyone involved in Maya's abuse. "Master Sergeant Torres, you and your accomplices will be immediately removed from this facility pending court-martial proceedings. Your security clearances are hereby revoked, and you are confined to quarters until military police arrive to escort you to pretrial detention." The military police vehicles that appeared at the edge of the formation had been positioned there before the announcement began, waiting for the signal to collect Torres and his conspirators. The systematic nature of their downfall was as thorough and devastating as their systematic abuse of Maya had been cruel and calculated. As Torres was escorted away in handcuffs, Maya remained at attention beside Major General Reeves, surrounded by recruits who now understood they had witnessed something far more significant than integration training. They had seen justice delivered with surgical precision to men who had betrayed everything the uniform was supposed to represent. 6 months later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground at Fort Braxton as a new class of integration recruits stood at attention for their first day of training. The atmosphere was completely transformed from the toxic environment that had existed under Torres's command. Where once there had been an undercurrent of hostility and systematic bias, there was now an environment of professional respect and genuine commitment to excellence. Maya Chun stood before the formation wearing the rank insignia of a master sergeant, her promotion having come through faster than anyone in recent memory. But more importantly than her new rank was her new position as Director of Integration Training, a role created specifically to prevent the kind of systematic abuse that had nearly destroyed her own military career. The silver star on her collar caught the sunlight, a visible reminder to everyone present that competence and courage knew no gender boundaries. The court-martial of Diego Torres had been swift and devastating. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including video footage, audio recordings, and photographic documentation of systematic assault, Torres had pled guilty to all charges rather than face the humiliation of a public trial. His dishonorable discharge had been accompanied by reduction to the lowest enlisted rank, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, and 18 months in military prison. The man who had spent 20 years building a career based on intimidation and prejudice had watched it all disappear in a single morning of military justice. Kyle Morrison had received a similar fate, his dreams of infantry service replaced by the reality of civilian life with a criminal record that would follow him forever. Jackson Hayes and Timothy Walsh had been discharged with general court-martial convictions that ensured they would never again wear the uniform they had dishonored through their participation in systematic harassment. The swift and thorough destruction of everyone involved in Maya's abuse had sent a clear message throughout the military that such behavior would be met with the full force of institutional justice. Maya addressed the new recruits with the authority that came from having proven herself under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Her voice carried across the formation with the confidence of someone who had earned respect through competence rather than demanding it through intimidation. You are here because you have volunteered to be part of something larger than yourselves. Integration is not a social experiment or a political statement. It is the recognition that courage, competence, and character exist in equal measure among all who choose to serve. My job is to ensure that every one of you has the opportunity to prove your worth based on your performance, not your gender, race, or background. The recruits listened with the kind of attention that Torres had never commanded, understanding that they were hearing from someone whose credibility had been forged in actual combat rather than constructed through bullying and bluster. Maya's approach to training was demanding but fair, challenging but supportive, designed to build soldiers rather than break spirits. Behind the formation, Major General Reeves stood observing the transformation she had helped create. Her investigation had not only delivered justice for Maya, but had also resulted in comprehensive reforms to integration training throughout the military. New oversight protocols, mandatory recording of training exercises, and regular inspections by senior officers ensured that the kind of systematic abuse Torres had practiced would never again go undetected. The morning training schedule included all the same physical challenges that had been used to torture Maya, but now they were conducted with genuine safety protocols and actual partnership between recruits. The trust drill that had nearly cost Maya her life was now performed with properly maintained equipment and instructors who understood that their job was to build confidence rather than destroy it. During the lunch break, Maya retreated to her new office in the administrative building, the same building where Major General Reeves had documented every moment of her systematic abuse. The walls were lined with her commendations and awards, but more importantly, they displayed photographs of the female soldiers who had successfully completed integration training under her leadership. Each success story was a victory against the prejudice and hatred that Torres had represented. A soft knock on her door interrupted her paperwork review. A young female recruit stood in the doorway, her expression showing the mixture of determination and uncertainty that Maya remembered feeling during her own first days at Fort Braxton. The recruit's name was Jennifer Martinez, and she was struggling with some of the same challenges Maya had faced, though without the systematic campaign of abuse that had made Maya's experience so traumatic. Master Sergeant Chun, I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk. Some of the male recruits have been making comments about whether I belong here, and I wanted to get your perspective on how to handle the situation. Maya gestured for Martinez to take a seat, recognizing the opportunity to provide the mentorship and support she had never received during her own integration training. The conversation that followed was exactly the kind of guidance Maya wished someone had been able to provide during her darkest moments at Fort Braxton. The afternoon brought a special ceremony that had been planned to mark the 6-month anniversary of the integration program reforms. Major General Reeves presented Maya with a new assignment that would expand her influence far beyond Fort Braxton. She was being promoted to the Pentagon staff as Assistant Director of Military Integration Policy, a position that would allow her to shape training standards across all branches of the armed services. As Maya stood before the assembled crowd accepting her new assignment, her thoughts turned to Diego Torres and what had become of the man whose arrogance and prejudice had nearly destroyed her military career. Intelligence reports indicated he was working security at a shopping mall in suburban Atlanta, his military bearing diminished to checking receipts and directing traffic in parking lots. The man who had once commanded absolute authority over the lives of young soldiers now spent his days in a uniform that commanded no respect and wielded no real power. The irony was poetic in its completeness. Torres had believed that destroying Maya would validate his prejudices and preserve his vision of military culture. Instead, his systematic abuse had elevated her to a position where she could prevent such abuse from happening to anyone else. His attempt to drive her from the military had resulted in her gaining more influence over military culture than he had ever possessed. The evening brought Maya's final act as Director of Integration Training at Fort Braxton. She stood before the newest class of recruits and delivered a speech that had become legendary among those who heard it, a talk about character, courage, and the true meaning of military service. The uniform you wear represents a promise to defend principles larger than your personal prejudices. When you take the oath of enlistment, you commit to judging your fellow soldiers by their performance, their character, and their courage under pressure. Anyone who allows bias based on gender, race, or background to influence their treatment of a fellow service member has broken that sacred trust and dishonored everything this uniform represents. As Maya concluded her speech and dismissed the formation, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the brink of career destruction to the pinnacle of institutional influence. The systematic abuse she had endured had been transformed into systematic reform that would protect countless future soldiers from experiencing similar treatment. The trust drill that had nearly killed her was now conducted with genuine safety protocols and actual partnership between recruits. The isolation she had experienced was now prevented through mandatory buddy systems and regular check-ins with senior leadership. The documentation that had saved her career was now standard protocol, ensuring that abuse could never again be hidden behind the facade of training. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever faced a situation where someone underestimated your abilities or tried to make you quit something you believed in? How did you find the strength to keep going when everything seemed stacked against you? Stories like Maya's resonate because we have all faced moments where we had to choose between giving up or fighting through. Share your own experience in the comments because your story of perseverance might inspire someone else who is facing their own trust drill moment. Maya packed her personal belongings and prepared to leave Fort Braxton for her new assignment in Washington. The office that had once been her sanctuary would soon be occupied by her hand-picked successor, another combat veteran whose credentials and character would ensure the continued success of the integration program. As she walked across the parade ground one final time, Maya could see evening formation beginning for the current class of recruits. The sight filled her with satisfaction, knowing that every soldier standing in that formation would be judged by their performance rather than their demographics. The toxic culture that Torres had created was not just defeated, but completely eradicated, replaced by something stronger and more worthy of the uniform they all wore. The legacy of systematic abuse had been transformed into a legacy of systematic justice. The trust drill that was meant to break her had instead broken the very system that enabled such abuse. Maya Chun had not just survived institutional prejudice, she had dismantled it and built something better in its place. Justice had been served with the precision of a military operation, but more importantly, lasting change had been implemented that would prevent future soldiers from enduring what she had experienced. The personal victory was satisfying, but the institutional transformation was the true triumph that made her suffering worthwhile. The sun set behind the Georgia pines as Maya drove away from Fort Braxton for the last time, headed toward a new assignment where her influence would be felt throughout the entire military structure. Behind her, the lights of the barracks glowed with the presence of soldiers who would never know how close their institution had come to being defined by prejudice rather than performance. The trust drill had revealed everything it was designed to expose, but not in the way Torres had intended. It had shown who could be trusted with the sacred responsibility of training America's defenders, and who was capable of betraying that trust for the sake of personal prejudice. The consequences had been swift, thorough, and absolutely final for those who chose hatred over honor.